Welcome, guys. Welcome back to this new episode or new session about Azure DevOps, Jenkins in a webhook. So what we have learned so far is what is CI, what is CD, how how we define CI and CD, what is the significance of the CI, and why we need CD. So those things we discuss how, we learn how to create a pipeline, basically the small and the major steps in creating a pipeline. Then we learn about the agents, the different agents, the Microsoft hosted agents, or your, self or your private agent, basically. Now, the third part is, which is not the last part, basically, but the third part is, if I want to use Jenkins as an intermediate build step. And why we are using it? Because most of the companies are still using Jenkins. Some of their operations are already moved to Azure, but still there is no 100% Azure. Because Jenkins is still rules many companies. So many companies are still using Jenkins, even though they are moved to Azure or AWS or GCP. So we need some utility that will connect my Azure to Jenkins, do the build, and once the artifact get created, either that artifact should move to the to Azure, and then I can start working it. So the entire process is something like this. I'm using Azure, but in Azure I need a service to connect to my Jenkins. It should ask me the username and password and all the token system, the connection, the tokens is the logistic part to connect my Azure system, Azure DevOps environment to Jenkins, do the build, and create the artifacts, and then coming back to the Azure DevOps environment, and then I will deploy it in the in Kubernetes or wherever I want to deploy. So that is the ask, basically. Now, how we can do that? So create a service hook. There is a service hook concept. If anyone asks you in the interview that how we connect DevOps and Azure DevOps with the Jenkins, then we can say that there is a service hook concept. So you need to create the service hook for Azure DevOps with the Jenkins. How we do that? That there's some process, configure the Jenkins, set up a Jenkins build, trigger Jenkins, pricing. So those things are these are the steps. To configure the Jenkins means, first of all, you need to create the service hook, a webhook, basically. And this webhook, service hook, will connect to the Jenkins part. So we need to create the Jenkins. Either that Jenkins could be on the VM, or we can use Kubernetes for the Jenkins part. So those things we'll discuss in this lab, basically. So first you need to configure the Jenkins. So if you are running and setting up the Jenkins on premises, then you can enable the HTTPS. If the condition one is you have Jenkins in on-prem, whether it's on VM or it's on any box, then you can connect them. How do you connect? We can enable the Jenkins, installing the tokens or installing the plugins in Jenkins, and then you can connect the Azure DevOps to the Jenkins. So configure the Jenkins. If you want to configure Jenkins, you will need to set up the Jenkins on premises, add the change. These are the plugins that you need to deploy, you need to install, and then set up the Jenkins build. Set up the Jenkins build means these are the projects, that different projects you need to work with. Freestyle project, build Maven, means either Maven project, freestyle project, or like monitor exceptional jobs. So these are the things that you need to configure on that one. Now set up the URL for your Git repository also. You can set up make sure that your Git repository where the code is, basically. Because Jenkins build needs the code from where the code is. And then you can trigger the Jenkins. You can, set up trigger the Jenkins. How you trigger the Jenkins? From your from your Azure DevOps environment. So there is a service hook concept. I told you that there is a service hook. You need to create the service hook. Go to the project setting. We'll see that lab shortly. Don't worry about that. So in the service hook, we create the subscription, and in subscription, we will select the on the left hand side we have lots of subscription to create the service hook. In one of them will be the Jenkins. So when you select the Jenkins, you need to select the trigger. Now to create the trigger on this type of event will be code push. Whenever you push the code, that trigger should that or the that process should get triggered. The triggering happen when you push something, and then there is an action. Perform the action called trigger get build. So build action needs to be performed. So let's see the how we can do those things on the Azure DevOps. So I'll paste those things here.
In this demo, I'm going to show you how to create a Linux VM using Cloud init to spin up a virtual machine and install Jenkins. Jenkins is a build automation server that you can integrate with Azure to scale out your build capacity. So the first thing we need to do is to create a working directory and a new text file. We'll call the text file cloud init jenkins, cloud-init-jenkins.txt. And from there, we will copy the cloud init contents from the Microsoft documentation located at this URL. This is the file that will be used to download and install Jenkins to the Linux virtual machine using the cloud init process. Let me just quickly create the cloud init file here and copy the file contents from the URL I mentioned earlier. Now that the file is ready, the next thing that we need to do is make sure that we have the Azure CLI or command line interface installed. If you do not have the Azure CLI installed, you can find it here at this URL. I already have the Azure CLI installed, so I'm not going to install it. But if you're working on Windows, then you can simply download and install the MSI package, and that works just fine. You can check to see if you already have the Azure CLI installed by opening a command prompt and typing az space -- version. This will tell you if Azure CLI is installed, which version Azure CLI it is, and if there's an update available or not. The first thing that you might need to do if you do not already have a resource group is create one. I will just quickly show you how to create a resource group for your Jenkins VM. The command is az for Azure CLI, group for the resources group context. Now we specify the create command. And then we specify a name with the name attribute and a location with the location attribute. That's all there is to creating a resource group using the Azure CLI. The next thing we need to do is create a virtual machine that our Jenkins server will be installed on. Since we're using the Azure command line interface, all commands start with AZ. Then we're working with the virtual machine context, so we type VM. Now we specify the create command and add the parameters. The first parameter is resource-group, and this tells Azure the name of the resource group we want to add the virtual machine to. The next attribute is name. This is the name you want to give your virtual machine. Then we need to specify the machine image using the image attribute. In our case, we want to use the latest version of Ubuntu, so we're going to enter Ubuntu LTS. Now we specify the initial admin username, and use the generate SSH key attribute to create the public and private encryption keys for our new virtual machine. Finally, we use the custom data attribute to specify our cloud init file that tells the template which software to install on our machine. If the cloud init file is not in your current working directory, you need to specify the entire path to the file. It will take a few minutes to install. Once it's installed, make sure to take note of the public IP address. We're going to need it later. Now that our virtual machine is created, we need to allow incoming communications with our Jenkins server on a specific port. So we will use the open port command to update our network security group and add an entry to our inbound port rules. The command is azvm, our resource group, our virtual machine name, what port we want to open, and what priority we want to use for the inbound port rule. We are going to use 8080 for the port and 1001 for the priority. If you're not sure what to use for the port and priority, check with your network administrator. They should be able to tell you what these values should be. After we have opened the port to allow communication to our Jenkins server, we now need to remotely connect to our new VM over SSH. Once we have successfully connected, we can check to see if our Jenkins service is running by typing service Jenkins status. And we should get a message telling us that the service is loaded. Now that we know the service is running, we need to get the initial password that was created when the service was installed. We can do that by printing it out to the screen using the sudo cat command, along with the file path to the initial password file. This file is located at the following path. Once we have our password, it's time to open our browser and navigate to our Jenkins server. We can find it at the public IP address we got when we created our virtual machine, followed by a colon with the port number we opened in our firewall. If you need to find the public IP address again, you can go to the VM in Azure and it will show you the public IP address on the overview screen for the virtual machine. This will bring us to a page where we can unlock our Jenkins server by using the password that we printed to the screen previously. I will just paste that here and click continue. The next page is where we can decide if we want to just install the most common Jenkins plugins or if we want to select additional plugins to add. We need to add the GitHub plugin, so I will click on the Select Plugins option on the right. This page shows us all the plugins that will be installed, and this is where we can search for additional plugins and select them. I will search for the GitHub plugin and check the checkbox and click Install. Now, Jenkins will install all the plugins that were selected, and I'll just speed up the time. So now that that's done, we need to create our first admin user. I'll just add the relevant information and create the user. Finally, the last thing we need to configure is the friendly URL for our Jenkins server. If you're going to use a DNS entry for your Jenkins server, then this is when you would add the friendly domain address. The root address is needed for almost everything that Jenkins does, so it's good to put the user-friendly address in now so that you can avoid confusion later. Now our Jenkins server is installed and ready to use. I hope you enjoyed this demo, and I'll see you in our next module.
Now, in our next lab, basically, I will help you to understand how we will use the service hooks, basically, how to configure the service hook and all those things. Thank you. Thanks for watching and happy learning, guys.